I work as a night administrator at a small roadside motel. It's not a particularly popular place. Mostly truck drivers, travelers, or those who didn't make it to the big city stay here. The motel is old but well maintained. There's always a faint smell of coffee and cleaning supplies in the hallways, and a quiet, almost oppressive atmosphere in the lobby due to the dim lighting and the monotonous hum of the vending machine. The job is not difficult but repetitive. Most of the time, I spend watching surveillance cameras or checking bookings. The motel has 3 floors, but only a few rooms are occupied at night. The cameras cover the hallways, parking lot, and entrance. And it's always the same. Tired guests check in, someone grabs a late coffee from the machine, and occasionally random passers-by ask if there are any vacant rooms. That night, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I was sitting at the front desk, going through the booking log, when my gaze accidentally fell on the surveillance monitor. There was a man standing behind the glass doors. He wasn't coming in, knocking, or trying to open the door. He was just standing there, staring toward the reception. At first, I thought he was a late guest hesitating to enter, but several minutes passed and he didn't move. He didn't check his phone, look around, or change position. He just stood there, waiting. A strange sense of unease started growing inside me. I looked away for just a second to switch cameras, and when I looked back at the screen, my heart jumped. The footage by the entrance was empty. The man was gone. But as soon as I looked up from the monitor, he was still standing there. A chill ran down my spine. How is this possible? Maybe the camera froze? But all the others were working fine. My palms were sweating as I rewound the footage. The last few minutes showed an empty entrance, but I had seen him with my own eyes. Was it someone's prank? Maybe he found a blind spot? But I knew this motel well, and I could swear the camera covered the whole entrance. At that moment, one of the guests, a woman in her 50s, came up to the desk to ask for an extra blanket. I got distracted for a moment, and when I looked back at the door, the man was gone. I quickly stepped out from behind the desk and rushed to the entrance. I opened the door, looked around. Empty. No cars, no sounds, only the monotonous hum of the lamps above the parking lot. No trace of the person who had just been standing right in front of me. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept checking the cameras, going outside, staring into the darkness outside the window, but I didn't see him again. Still, the unease wouldn't leave me. The next day, when my shift ended, I decided to review the archived footage and old police reports. What I found made my blood run cold. Exactly 1 year ago, on this same night, one of the motel guests brutally murdered his wife right in the lobby, then went up to his room on the 3rd floor and jumped out of the window. The report stated that he had been nervous all day and had approached the administrator several times, saying he saw someone by the door. But no one believed him. I kept searching and finally came across a photograph of that man. It was the same face. I could no longer sleep peacefully. Every night, when I went on shift, I felt like something was watching me. I worked as a night watchman at an old factory that had been abandoned for several years. The building was large, with massive halls and dark corridors where every step echoed loudly. The factory had once been very popular, but over time, departments were shut down one by one, and eventually, the place was left alone, its interior filled with emptiness and darkness. The job wasn't complicated, but it certainly wasn't interesting. My task was simply to walk around the premises, check that everything was in place, and ensure that no one had broken in. At first, everything seemed normal. The first few nights, I followed the same route, gazing at the dead, empty factory, and occasionally listening to the echoes of my footsteps bouncing off the walls. Every floor was empty, and the old ventilation systems let out a distant sound, like echoes of days long forgotten. But after a few days, something strange happened on the 2nd floor. It was nighttime, and almost complete silence had fallen. I went up to the upper floor to check one of the doors. It was part of my routine, but this floor felt different, darker. with more stale air that seemed heavy with time and forgotten stories. I noticed that one of the large windows, which had always been covered with curtains, was slightly open. Not all the way, just enough. And through that slightly open window, I saw something strange, a dark figure. It wasn't completely clear, but it was unmistakable. I wasn't sure if it was just a trick of the light or if I was imagining things, but the shadow was hard to mistake for anything else. I decided it was probably just a play of light and shadow, or maybe my tiredness was messing with my perception. Still, the uncomfortable feeling remained. I tried to ignore it and continued my checks. However, the next day it happened again. The same figure, the same shadow, was standing in the same spot. This time, I decided to go upstairs and take a closer look. When I reached the second floor and approached the window, there was no one there. I checked around, looking for footprints, but everything was as it had been. Maybe I had just missed something, or maybe it was the reflection playing tricks on me, since the windows were old, and the factory was often damp, which could distort the image. Still, something told me to keep paying attention. Over the next few nights, things started getting even stranger. The shadow didn't just appear in the window. It seemed to move, change shape. I watched it out of the corner of my eye, trying not to lose focus. The more I paid attention to it, the more it felt like I was being watched. Then I started hearing another sound, footsteps. But they weren't mine. They'd appear when I walked down the hallway, as if someone were following me from the other end. One night, I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to get to the bottom of it. I went back to the window to look at the figure more closely. I could no longer deny that it wasn't just a reflection, nor a trick of the light. The window didn't show my shadow or anything belonging to me. Only a dark figure standing there, watching me from the other side. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do. But when I turned to head back to the stairs, I heard something even stranger. Far down the corridor, near one of the other old doors, I saw yet another shadow. This time, it wasn't still. It was moving toward me, as though it had stepped out from the darkness, ready to come closer. I barely managed to take a step back, but it felt like something was still after me. All my nerves were on edge. I rushed downstairs, trying not to panic, but as soon as I opened the door to leave, I felt someone watching me again. I turned around, and for a moment, I saw one of the shadows standing in the darkness, staring at me. I couldn't handle it anymore. That same night, I left the factory and never returned. However, a few days later, I received a phone call. The friend who had hired me told me that strange things had started happening at the factory again. According to him, some old documents revealed that the factory had once been the site of something criminal, and what I had seen wasn't just a reflection or an illusion. The factory had its dark secrets that should never have come to light. The figures I had seen were part of something far more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. And although the fear slowly faded every time I passed by the factory's window, I felt that same terrible sensation. The shadow was still there, waiting. I had been working in a call center for over 2 years, and during that time, the job became a sort of routine for me. It was a typical, emotionless job, answering calls, solving simple technical issues, providing information to clients about products or services. Most of the calls were predictable people asking questions or reporting problems. Every now and then there were unusual cases, but they were never anything extraordinary. However, one evening everything changed. That evening I was staying late in the office because I had a few calls that needed to be wrapped up. The office was almost empty, with just a few other employees still around. As the night went on, the calls became fewer, and I found myself working alone in the large, quiet office. I was getting tired when I took the next call. At first, it was just the usual static in the line, which is typical of bad connections. But after a few seconds, the noise faded and was replaced by a strange, quiet silence. I figured it was just another technical glitch, but then the voice on the other end was clear, though distant. It sounded as if it was coming from a great distance, almost like the call was being made through an old, worn-out telephone line. I greeted the caller and asked how I could assist them. But instead of answering my question, the voice started repeating something strange. "You shouldn't be there." At first, I thought it was some kind of prank or a joke from one of my colleagues. I laughed it off, thinking it would end soon, but the voice kept repeating the same words. "You shouldn't be there." The more it repeated those words, the more uneasy I felt. Something about it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't a normal call. I tried to end the call, but the voice didn't stop. It kept repeating, each time more urgently, like it was trying to warn me. I didn't think much of it at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I finished my shift, though the thought of the call lingered. I headed home, trying to forget about it, but that night, something strange happened. I received another call, the same number, the same voice. I didn't answer it. I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I blocked the number and tried to push it out of my mind. But the next day, it happened again. The same voice, the same words. "You shouldn't be there." I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to do something. I decided to check out the old, unused phone lines in the building's basement. The office was in an old building, and I knew that some of the backup phone systems were in the basement. No one had used them for years, but I figured maybe there was something wrong with the lines, some kind of malfunction causing the strange calls. I waited until the office cleared out, and then I went down to the basement. The moment I opened the door to the basement, a wave of unease washed over me. It was dark down there, and the only light was from a single dim bulb hanging above. The air was damp, and there was a musty smell, like the place hadn't been used in a long time. I started walking down the narrow corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It was unnerving, but I was determined to find out what was causing the strange calls. As I moved deeper into the basement, I noticed something odd. In the corner, there was an old phone system, along with a metal box that seemed to be part of the old setup. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, yet it was still connected to something. I walked over to it and hesitated before pressing a button on the phone. When I did, I heard the familiar voice again. "You shouldn't be there." The words were even clearer this time, and the voice sounded closer, more distinct, as though it was right behind me. I froze. The feeling of dread that swept over me was overwhelming. My heart started racing, and I couldn't move. It felt like the room was closing in on me. The darkness seemed deeper, almost like it was alive, and I suddenly realized I had made a huge mistake by coming down here. I quickly turned around to leave, but as I glanced around the basement, the shadows seemed to grow, making it feel like I was trapped in some kind of maze. I hurried back to the stairs, but the sense of being followed lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was right behind me. When I got back to the office, I felt like I had escaped from something, but the unease didn't leave me. It stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. The following day, the calls continued. The same voice, the same message. "You shouldn't be there." No matter how many times I blocked the number, it kept coming through. Each time I picked up the phone, I heard those words again. "You shouldn't be there." I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave the call center and never go back. I changed my number and moved to a new place. But the calls didn't stop. They kept coming day after day. Every time I answered the phone, I heard that same voice. Even when I didn't pick up, I could feel it, like it was there, in the room with me. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. The voice was always there, always warning me, always saying, "You shouldn't be there." Now, I don't know what happened that night or what that voice really was. All I know is that it followed me. It found me no matter where I went. It's been years, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that voice in my head. "You shouldn't be there."